Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Yoann VENET. I'm a first-year PhD student working at the Institut Charles Hadron. And so I present my topic, which is a bit different compared to what's been presented today, because I'm working on the development of a PDOT-based electrically conductive composite for electronics applications. So this project first started because CGR, the company I am working with, wanted to improve the fabrication process of their electronic connectors that you can see here. Because it's a bit long, they meet adhesion and sealing issues at the polymer metal interface. And also we are in the context where the metal natural stocks are running out. So it was interesting to find an alternative to metallic materials for signal transmission. But so what conductivity are we talking about? Right now, we are mostly using metals whose conductivity reach up to 10 to the power of 5 Siemens per centimeter. But it's been found that when you go down to between 0.1 and 10 Siemens per centimeter, you are conductive enough to make signal transfer, plastronics, and so on. And this is notably the case for conductive thermoplastic composites, which is the kind of material we are interested in. So how do we make such materials? The most widespread strategy relies on the inclusion of conductive fillers into an insulating thermoplastic matrix. And once you reach the percolation threshold, we allow the current to go through the material. So there's still a bit of drawbacks because this method is still a bit expensive and is linked to the use of a high filler rate, leading mostly to processing difficulties. The second strategy relies on the use of intrinsically conductive polymers. So this is a kind of polymer, of conjugated polymer, that is able to conduct the current. There are a few families that has been developed since the late 70s. And well, they also have a few drawbacks, such as the instability in air, except for the one we decided to choose for our project, which is PDOT. And that is today widely used in the research under the form of PDOT PSS, for example, for fuel cells, solar cells, and so on. And so by combining those two methods, we created a new one at the lab, and it consists in the inclusion of fillers of conducting polymer into a thermoplastic matrix. So some work has already been conducted on this strategy by a former PhD student who first created a PDOT powder by oxidative polymerization. Then she mixed this powder by twin screw extrusion inside a PEO thermoplastic matrix to obtain a conductive composite which can reach up to 12 Siemens per centimeter of conductivity. So as you can see here, there's still a very high filler ratio. So additional work was conducted to increase the aspect ratio of the particles by doing supported polymerization on clay particles in order to reduce this percolation threshold here. So the results showed that it didn't work as well as we would have wanted, but it still led to the reduction of the use of PDOT of 50%, because the particles are 50% clay and 50% PDOT, and offer the same conductivity. So this is the starting point of my project with the following question: are we able to make such material compatible with industrial applications, with the ideal goal to replace the metal in those parts with our composite? And for that, we need to verify a few points, such as the stability of the conductivity during operation, the compatibility with transformation processes, and so on. So first, to ensure a good stability of the conductivity in the composite, I decided to study the grinding methods of the PDOT. So just after the synthesis and the drying, you obtain big chunks of PDOT. And when you zoom and observe them at the microscope, you have those fibrilar particles, but you can see that they are very much aggregated. So they need to be grinded properly to ensure proper transformation of the composite, but also ensure a correct dispersion within the matrix. So I compared two kinds of grinding methods. The first one using just a mortar, and the second one using a cryo grinder, which will cool down the particles to make them very brittle, and thanks to the iron ball and the vibration, to break them into a very fine powder. The first results can be observed at the numerical microscope, where you can see that using the cryo grinder, you will have much more very small micrometer scale particles, and the biggest particles would be just a few dozens of micrometer long, whereas with the mortar you still have much more bigger particles that can go up to 100 of micrometers long. And the results are also observed in the conductivity of the composite, because as you can see here, when using the cryo grinder, you have a median value of the conductivity that's much higher than with the mortar, but also you have a much reduced variation of the values, which means that we have a much more homogeneous material. We don't have big chunks of pilot at some point that will create depleted regions elsewhere. So we have something very homogeneous. Then after working on the preparation of the powder, I decided to focus on transformation processes. And since this is a very fast developing technology today, I decided to work on 3D printing. But instead of using classical filament technology through FDM, I used the FGF 3D printer that's equipped with a single screw extruder and can extrude pellets and powder. So my first idea was to make conductivity measurements depending on the printing direction, so X, Y, and Z. So I first designed different samples on the CAD software that I then sliced to create the 3D printing program. And I planned to cut them to make a conductivity measurement in the X, Y, and Z direction. So I compared two kinds of materials, our PEOP dot composite, but also commercially available protopasta conductive PLA, which is a PLA filled with about 20% of carbon black. Those are the kind of samples I could obtain using our material. And for the measurements, I used the 4-point apparatus connected to a multimeter. So these are the first results for the protopasta. So you see that our values are just a bit higher than the values of the supplier. And for our composite, you see that compared to the protopasta, we have a small reduction of the conductivity when going from the X to the Y and the Z direction, which is something that's very well documented in the literature and is due to the contact resistances between the layers while printing the material. So this decrease is acceptable and remains logical. But also you can see that in each case, our composite exhibits higher conductivity than the protopasta, which is well established, for example, in the DIY community. And so, for example, in the X direction, which is the one that we are interested in the most, because it's just one continuous line, we are more than 10 times more conductive, which means that for the same circuit, you will need to use 10 times less material. So that's a good advantage. Next, I decided to conduct additional measurements on straight lines that were printed by varying several other parameters. So, for example, the temperature and the nozzle diameter. And you can see that you may notice very small variations, but you can still see that the conductivity remains around 1 Siemens per centimeter. And you will have the same results when changing the layer height or the number or layer for a same sample height. You just have a little change in the values that is too small to be considered significant at this point. So it proves that we have a very stable conductivity even while changing the transformation parameters. And so ultimately, the final question was, are we, even though we have the values, are we effectively able to make electronics using this material? So I designed the small circuits, and I attached a small LED to it with a 9-volt battery, and I was able to prove that yes, we could allow the operation of small electronic components just with one layer of circuit. In this case, 3 very thin layers of the composite. So it makes it proves that the use of this material can be relevant to make electronics or signal transfer applications. So to conclude, I began working with a composite that exhibited conductivity values up to 10 Siemens per centimeter, and I proved that we could have stable conductivity up to 1 Siemens per centimeter using FGF 3D printer, and this kind of conductivity remains higher than those of most commercially available equivalents. Next step for my next steps of work, I will focus on other kinds of transformation process, such as injection molding or overmolding. I was already able to make some tests on those ones, and it was quite encouraging. I will also conduct an in-depth study of the conductivity temperature dependence of the PDOT, and the results obtained with this will help me choose a better matrix, thermoplastic matrix for the PDOT instead of the actually used PEO, which is not very relevant regarding its melting point, for example. Thank you for your attention. I will have the questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Yes, Sophie?
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. Actually, I have 2 questions. The first one is, why did you use the PEO as a polymer matrix?
So historically, there are several publications that show good compatibility between PEO and PDOT, and the starting point of the work of my former colleague that made the first strategy I showed before with the polymerization was to make a PEO PDOT composite in solution, and PEO is water soluble. So it started from here. Sorry?
Is it amorphous or semi-crystalline?
It's a very crystalline. So yeah, semi-crystalline. There's a high rate of crystallinity in the PEO, about 60 to 70%.
And my second question is, so you use only PDOT, not PDOT PSS?
Yes.
So you don't need the PSS, the PDOT was high electrical conductivity.
Exactly. In most cases, the PDOT PSS is not polymerized in the labs, but mostly bought from commercially available solutions. But the PSS is in excess and is insulating, so you mostly need post-treatments to gain higher conductivities.
Well, yeah, I have a question related to that actually. So I guess you started answering. So what's the advantage of using your method over the conventional PDOT PSS, which I think is slightly more conductive than what you have here? Yeah.
So first there is that, and yes, it's mainly usually PDOT PSS is also mostly used to make thin films, like the former work I talked about before was use the thin films of PDOT to then transform it again through melting processes. And this one allows us to have solid powder that we grind, and so it's more easily includable into a thermoplastic matrix.
So maybe what you could think of is using PDOT PSS powder to start with and grind this, because the PSS will increase the conductivity of the PDOT part.
Yeah, but
and you'll still be able to use that method properly.
Maybe in that case we would have to polymerize it ourselves and not take a solution, And but that's not mostly my track of work. I'm mostly working on the transformation processes, and the chemical processes is more the work of a colleague who's a chemist and is actively working on the polymerization. Yeah.
I like the approach of printing pilot, because pilot now, as you say, in solution, Renault de Madrid, for example, in Grenoble managed like 5,400 series per centimeter square. That's the solution. It's very nice what you do. I was just wondering how small you can print, and have you studied, do you plan to study the effect of printing direction on your connectivity of your parts?
That's what I did actually. I missed the back. So yeah, maybe. So the samples I created here. You see those red lines here? That was the pattern I followed to cut them. So for this part, you have samples printed in the X direction, so just continuous lines. Here on the Y direction, so just on the plate going like this. And here, this is in the Z direction. It's kind of a wall, and I also cut the sample to make measurement with the 4-point apparatus.
And what's the gradient between the conductivity? Because we could imagine you could draw like a resistor.
That's
like
the gradient. So it was a bit documented for the protopasta for the supplier values. You have kind of lower conductivity in the Z direction, not in the Y direction, but because they didn't do the same. For the Y direction, they basically did what I did for the X direction. But you have this decrease in conductivity here from going to X to Y to Z direction, and this is what we usually observe with a composite field with the carbon nanotubes or graphene and so on.
Any other questions? Maybe I have one last question then. Well, you mentioned changing the matrix.
Mm-hmm.
What do you already know? What kind of properties you're looking for? Was it about rheology because of the printing?
Mostly to be industry friendly, because the PEO first is water soluble and has a melting point of 67 degrees. So that's not very relevant for use in the industry. And we already made some tests mixing PDOT with the PP and PA actually. But we always ended up having much lower conductivity, like the maximum would be 10 to the power of -3 Siemens per centimeter. And we know that even for other kinds of fillers, such as graphene, for example, the interaction with the matrix can change the conductivity. So we are still looking for the reason.
PLA?
PLA, I think it's
proto thingy, whatever.
Yeah, the protopasta.
PLA-based?
It's PLA based.
Yeah.
It's PLA with 20% of carbon black.
Because PLA is pretty good for printing.
Yes, I think it's been made. I think we could go further on this, but I think my colleague already made some tests on this one. So one of the tracks of work I plan to go on is to study the interaction between the matrices and the filler.
Thank you. Thank you, the speaker. Okay, so I guess we'll do the picture now, right? Here.